Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Engel. I am the president of the Ward 6 Democrats, and I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight for our at-large candidate forum. On my right, your left, we have our moderators. We have Sam Ford, who probably most of you know. And we also have Elizabeth Ogorick from the Hill Rag and Capital Community News, who, along with the Hill Center, are our hosts this evening. And then obviously the candidates will be introducing themselves momentarily, but you probably recognize them as well. Two of our currently serving council members, Councilmember Christina Henderson and Councilmember Robert White. We are still expecting the Republican candidate to arrive, Rob Simons, or Simmons. I'm not sure which way it's pronounced. And so hopefully he'll be arriving shortly. So I also wanted to acknowledge our co-sponsors this evening. We're at BOGO. Ward 3 Dems, Bo Finley is representing them, and DC Young Dems represented by Maggie and, thank you, yeah. So also co-sponsors with us of this evening's event. And thank you all for coming out. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chuck to go through the rules of the day before we get started. You ready, Chuck? Okay. All right. Chuck. Here you go, Chuck.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to go over some rules today, which are I'll keep it very nominal. I know the candidates will be very respectful of each other, so I don't need to read that section of rules that we have because we do have two fine candidates in front of us. And we do have time limits, and they'll be following the guidelines of the timekeeper, and the moderator will step in if necessary. And our timekeeper will be they'll be giving you, prior to 15 seconds of when the time's over, there'll be a notification that you're reaching the end, and then the scary stop sign will come up, and hope that you can stop at that point. We'll be taking questions. All the questions have already been provided and will be handled by the moderators. And we would note that we do have cards available. If you wanted to raise your hand, you'll be quickly given a card and a pen in which fill out, and we'll be handing that to the moderators who will answer the questions at their discretion. A number of times we don't get to all the questions, and what we have done in the past is we will submit those to the candidates, and they can provide answers, which the Hill Rag usually puts it on their website. So we want to make sure that we get answers to everyone's questions at these events. And I just want to make one note. If you have a cell phone, if you could please turn that off. And again, thank you all for coming this evening. And let's go. Thank you. Oh, okay.
I'm not in charge. Good evening, and thank you, everybody, and welcome to the Hill Center. I think Sam is busy trying to make his cell phone quiet. So let's say we're going to have 2 minutes for each of the candidates to introduce themselves. Your time to answer each question is 1 minute. There's 30 seconds if you name drop each other. And of course, you'll get 15 seconds notice before your time is up. Don't make me mom you. I don't want to bring out my mom voice. Sam doesn't want to bring out his dad voice. But we will, and we'll talk over you. So should we start with that? Would each of the candidates like to introduce themselves?
Good evening. First and foremost, I want to thank our hosts and our moderators. For those who don't know me, I'm at-large council member Robert White. I'm in my second term on the council. Much more important things about me. I'm the husband of an absolutely incredible woman named Christy. I'm the dad to two amazing girls, Madison and Monroe, who are 8 and 5.5. And Monroe, if you're watching, yes, I included the half. And I'm asking for your vote because I have been an effective council member. This is a city that I love, a city that I grew up in. And after I went to law school and cut my teeth on Capitol Hill working for Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, I went to the D.C. Council to be a voice for folks like my family. On issues like early childhood education, I stepped in and worked with Councilmember Vince Gray to create the most expansive early childhood education program in the nation. I'm right now working on an expansion of trade and vocational education. When the Supreme Court stepped in to overturn Roe v. Wade, I stepped in with legislation to protect women and abortion providers. When we look at public safety, I work to get public safety bills passed to make our city more safe. But we have a lot more work to do. We know that our economy is not where we want it to be. Public safety is not where we want it to be. Government services have declined and are declining. And we need members of the council who are going to be effective representatives of you. I believe that is what I've done. This is work that I am very passionate about, and I'm asking for your vote because I have been an effective advocate for you and because we have more work to do. So I thank you for coming tonight and really want to thank my colleague and fellow candidate, Christina Henderson.
Good evening, everyone. For those I don't know, I'm at-large Councilmember Christina Henderson. I was elected in 2020. So first, let me say this is so different from 2020 when I met all of you via Zoom. So it's great to have an opportunity, and I want to thank the Ward 6 Dems for convening this conversation this evening. When I ran 4 years ago, I ran because of a long-held principle that I had in my career, that one zip code should not determine your opportunity for success. And I felt like in the district that wasn't necessarily something that we were living up to. If you think about the life expectancy of a child born in Ward 8 and the life expectancy of a child born in Ward 3, it's 15 years. But the District of Columbia is not that big. And so there are lots of policies that we should be working on that I feel to close that gap, but also to push people even further towards opportunity. I currently chair the committee's Health Committee. This is my second year chairing the Committee on Health, and so a lot of my focus has been around a variety of public health issues, whether it's tackling the opioid crisis in the district, tackling the behavioral health and mental health issues that we have, other issues in terms of emergency access to medication for our children in our schools. We have a new hospital that we have to open up in Ward 8. We have a new requirement on insurance that I helped pass that requires our insurance companies to cover fertility treatments. That begins in January of 2025. So when people ask me why I'm running for re-election, it's partly because I'm a little crazy, but also because I feel like there's unfinished business, and I feel like I have a lot to contribute still to the conversation in terms of moving policies forward so that we're living up to our best in the district and making sure that it's working for everyone. I'm looking forward to the questions tonight.
Well, you know, it seems that at this point, at least, just about everybody, we're listening to you, we're looking at your election, but everybody's looking at the presidential election. And I remember 2016, everybody here at D.C. was shocked when Donald Trump won. And I remember the mayor went up to New York to talk to him. And in the 4 years he was president, I don't know that the city had great relations with the administration, but I know that when it came time to pass out COVID money, they considered D.C. a territory, and the city lost a lot of money, even though D.C. pays more taxes than, you know, a number of states. So here we are again, and there's a very good possibility that Donald Trump will become president.
Don't put that bad juju on the
Okay,
universe.
well, I'm just telling you as a journalist that it's a very good possibility that Donald Trump could be president again. And the words that we are getting from a number of the Republicans out there is that they plan to focus in a negative way on D.C. I want to know what your thoughts are about this and how you deal with that. What are the thoughts that you have if that happens? Mr. White.
I appreciate you asking about my deepest fear, a second term of Donald Trump. First and foremost, I'm going to work to make sure that doesn't happen. This Saturday, I'll spend my whole day in Pennsylvania, hopefully get back in time for Boo at the Zoo with my girls. But they understand we have got to make sure we defeat Donald Trump because he, as president, will be detrimental to our country and particularly to our city. So there are a few things that we have to do. First of all, we have to lawyer up. We have to make sure that every single protection that we can put in place to protect D.C. we have in place, that we have a full understanding, the good and bad, of what a president can do on day one without the authority of Congress. And we have to assume that that's what Donald Trump will do. And we have to work with our allies, with states, in order to protect the District of Columbia, because even though we might have a crazy president, we will still have Congress and we will have friends in the Democratic Party, and we're going to have to lean on them.
I agree with Councilmember White. So for those who don't know my background, the 4 years of the Trump administration, I was working for Leader Schumer, working on education, labor, postal, and census issues in that 4 chaotic years of the Trump administration. So I've spent a lot of time in the last few weeks trying to remind people that it didn't get crazy on January 6th. It was crazy before that, and Republicans already have the District of Columbia in their crosshairs because they like to use us as a petri dish for the policies that they cannot pass nationwide. And so in addition to ensuring that we're shoring up our protections, whether it be consumer protections or for residents, I think we need to do a better job in the district of combating misinformation about the policies that we have here. There was a recent op-ed in the Washington Post attacking our early childhood education system here in the district, filled with inaccuracies, and the Washington Post printed it. We need to be educating Democratic members of Congress and our allies about the truth versus what someone from Utah and South Carolina think is happening here in the District of Columbia. And so far, I don't feel like we've done a really good job of doing that.
Sort of a linked question and maybe a bargaining tool as we could be dealing with a new administration. This is a question I know you get asked a lot. Your view, if the city could get a control of it, of RFK campus, would you support the return of the Commanders to RFK campus? And what is the role of public financing versus an NFL stadium?
Well, so first off, I had always felt that we needed to focus on keeping the teams that we currently have here in the district. I'm glad we averted that particular crisis with Monumental. But I also feel like us talking about luring the Commanders back is putting the cart before the horse. We don't control the land yet. And right now we have a senator from a state who doesn't live here nor close to here, who's holding up that opportunity for us to be able to do that. Do I feel like RFK Stadium, its best and highest use is an NFL stadium? No. I think we have other things that we need, whether it be additional workforce housing. We have a need for an indoor sports facility for some of our young people who, if they do indoor track, they're having to go to Maryland and Virginia in order to practice or to compete. We've spent a lot of money to restore our river. Do I want miles and miles of surface parking to pollute it once again? Absolutely not. So, I think everybody's getting excited because the Commanders won 4 games. We've been here before. Let's see where the rest of the season takes us.
Let me first of all admit I'm a lifelong Washington football fan, and I'm thrilled about this season, even if we couldn't beat Baltimore, but we look more competitive than I've seen us in a lot of years. More importantly than me being a Commanders fan, I'm a fifth-generation Washingtonian who's seen most of his family priced out of this city because we don't have enough housing. So priority for RFK site is housing. That won't be the only thing that goes there, and I think all of us need to acknowledge that. And here's what I know about the idea of a stadium. Taxpayers cannot and will not pay for a stadium for billionaires. The second thing is that I don't see a point to a stadium used for 8 home games a year when we have a need for more recreation fields for our young people, and we are a city that prioritizes its environment. So I have not seen a proposal from the Commanders that says, hey, here's an idea for a stadium that can also be used by the community and that includes impervious surface. So no, I can't support it. But I also want to be careful not to judge an idea I've not seen. So I don't think it's going to work. I will not support taxpayer funding, but I have not seen a plan, so I can't say no to it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask you all about Initiative 83. I know Councilmember Henderson has been a big supporter of it, but I don't know if you're supporting both parts. So there are 2 parts of it, as I understand. One part is ranked choice voting, and then the other part would allow independents to vote in the D.C. Democratic primary. What are your views? Do you support or oppose? Starting with you, Adrian.
Thank you for that question, Sam. I think all of us want to see more equitable elections. I don't think there's anybody who wants to move away from that. The question is whether or not I-83 moves us closer to that or further from that. And I don't believe it moves us closer, and I'll say why. So I don't support I-83, and here's why. A sizable portion of our city does not use its second vote currently in the at-large race for as long as we've had home rule. What we know from New York City, which is ahead of the District of Columbia on ranked choice voting, is that the majority of people who used their second vote were from more affluent areas, and the majority of people who didn't were from less affluent areas. I am not willing to trade off what I believe is an issue of equity. On the issue of open primaries, the reason I don't support that is because if we want open primaries, then it has to be good not just today when DC is primarily progressive, but if 10 years from now DC is not primarily progressive, we would want that same policy to be good, and I don't think it would be. So if it ain't good now and 10 years from now, I can't support it, and it's not there yet.
I'm registered independent, so I feel differently about this, as well as the 76,000 other registered independents in the district. The idea that I can't participate in who is eventually voted as mayor or attorney general in this city is incredibly frustrating. And I would add to that, I can appreciate the arguments from the DC Democratic Party about wanting to respect and I know you guys are part of the Democratic Party, but I sort of feel too, my taxpayer dollars are going for an election I can't participate in. So if you feel very strongly that independents shouldn't participate, then the party should fund its primary as what happens in other jurisdictions. I've been on record supporting ranked choice voting. I introduced the legislation my first year on the council, and that was partly out of my own experience. People don't remember there were 24 people on the ballot when I ran in 2020. I won with less than 15% of the vote, and while I am grateful for every vote that I earned, over 79,000, I do feel like we need, as our elections remain competitive, we need to get to a point where we can truly have 50+1. And right now, I don't feel like our current system is serving us well, and we will continue to have competitive elections. We saw that in Ward 7 in the primary race. And so I hope voters truly educate themselves on this issue.
Now, housing. Affordable housing is an issue. It's been before the council a couple of times. You just unanimously voted an Emergency Rental Assistance Act to narrow some rental protections and make it easier to evict renters. But we also have an affordable housing crisis. What is the data telling you, and what is DC Council actually doing to improve access to affordable housing here in the district? Yes.
Okay. So the ERAP legislation that we dealt with was very complicated in terms of tension. In terms of the data that you were saying, I have data that tells me across our affordable housing portfolio, our landlords had over $100 million in arrears, meaning people who were not paying their rent. I had an affordable housing company who essentially shut their doors, and we were about to see foreclosures happen across the city, which truly would have affected the affordability crisis even more, because when a landlord has to return the building to the bank, the entire building loses affordability. So you have a situation where you might, let's say you have a 20 unit building. If you have 7 people in that building who haven't been paying their rent, the entire building might be affected by that, and we have to make some difficult choices. Do I feel like we're done with this? Absolutely not. There's more investments that need to be made, particularly ensuring that we're investing more in the 30 to 80% range. So again, sort of the workforce housing piece, and I'm excited to continue working with my colleague on this particular issue.
Thank you for asking about one of the most important issues for many of us, which is the availability and cost of housing. As somebody who has seen my family price out of the city, this is something that I have to prioritize. You asked what the data is telling us. It's telling us 2 things that I think my colleague said very well. One, it's saying that DC is too expensive for people to live. There's no way to reduce the cost of housing without building more housing. The second thing it's telling us is that even affordable housing providers, the people who build our affordable housing, are not able to stay in business. And we have to take these as really flashing red lights and do something about it. What I am doing right now is starting to convene some of the smartest people in the district and the smartest people in the country. Expect us to introduce a broad housing bill early in the new year, because we have to act on an issue that is an emergency. That means that we all have to get comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. We have to face the reality that people need a place to live, and it's still called, you still need someone to build it, which means people have to want to do business in DC. That means we're going to take on hard issues. I don't mind taking on hard issues, and this is going to be one that we're going to have to push together.
I'm just going to follow up on that. Sorry, Sam. You guys, it's weird to talk over Sam Ford, but I'm going to do it. A lot of that data, though, seems to speak to the situation that landlords and developers are finding themselves in. If we're rolling back COVID-era rental protections, what do we know about the people who it is now easier to evict and harder to give assistance to? What can we do for those people?
I appreciate you drilling down on this point. This is about people, and I think my colleague answered the question well, and so I don't mean to restate her, but I'm going to restate it. The day before we voted on the emergency rental assistance bill, I was at an apartment building called Roundtree in Ward 8 and talked to them about this difficult issue because I don't run from it. And I said, look, somebody owns this building, right? Just like any other mortgage, just like any other home, they have to pay the mortgage. And if half the building is not paying its rent and half is, everybody's gone when the bank comes collecting. And people say they understand that. So they understand that we have to do something. Not everyone. Some people are not paying their rent because they can't pay their rent. Those are the people we've got to make sure the ERAP resources are going to. There are people who are not paying their rent because they believe we are not enforcing it. Those are the people who are taking advantage of it and making ERAP not work for the people who need it. So what we're doing is not increasing evictions, it's making sure that only the people who should get emergency rental assistance are getting it, and people who are deciding not to pay their rent will be evicted.
Yeah, no, I agree. What Councilmember Robert White said is 100% accurate, but I also want to clarify for people because I think a lot of people are conflating those who are in market rate rental units versus those who are in affordable housing developments that have been highly subsidized, right? So when you are in an affordable housing development that has been highly subsidized, there's a calculation based on your income, and that is what you're paying towards your rent. So I think a lot of people are thinking like, well, of course people can't pay because you're asking for $4,000. That's not what we're talking about for this particular set of housing providers. And I don't feel like we have been very specific in sort of communicating some of the crises that are sort of brewing. But I think Councilmember White is correct. We're going to have some difficult conversations. The idea that the large portion of the money that we have just dedicated to the Housing Production Trust Fund is literally just going to go to shore up these properties, meaning that there's no new production that will be coming in the next year, is going to set us back. And so we have to figure out, along with the administration, how to get on the right path here.
One of your colleagues, Councilmember Trayon White, is the subject of a federal prosecution at this point. And I'm interested in your views on what has happened. Your views on what has happened. Do you think he should be expelled? And do you think the council should take legislative action in this area as to basically to govern the behavior of council members? I'll start with you, Ms. Henderson.
Well, we already have a council code of conduct that governs our behaviors and ethics. I will say this, the council is in a very interesting position. Anytime in the past, if you've been in DC for a while, you know this has been an issue that has occurred, but anytime that this has happened where you've had a council member who's been arrested or charged, they have resigned within 48 to 72 hours of those happening. So we're kind of in uncharted territory here. There's an investigation that's going to take place, and we'll have those results and a report and recommendations on that in December. But I want for folks to keep in mind, the council's prerogative here is not to decide guilt or innocence on the criminal charges. What we are talking about is whether or not the council code of conduct was broken. That's it. That's what we're talking about. And so I don't want folks to conflate the two, although very similar. Our code of conduct is our code of conduct. We have annual trainings on it. And so, you know, we have some lawyers, and we'll see where the investigation takes us.
On a council of only 13 people, the chances that two of us are going to have the same name is wild. So thank you to everyone who says Councilmember Robert White. And for those news organizations who don't, you may get an email from my dad, apparently, telling you to use the first name. I want to start out with humor because the issue is one that does pain me. I am a council member, but I'm also a D.C. resident. And like Councilmember Henderson said, like, we've seen this before. This is not a good look for our city, particularly as we look at possible Republican majorities or Republican White Houses, and that has a real impact on our city. But I am on the ad hoc committee. All of the members of the council, except for Councilmember Trayon White, are. we will have to take a vote on things including expulsion. If I tell you today I believe he should be expelled, then I've lost my credibility in that vote. And people I represent or people that Councilmember Trayon White represents may not trust my vote. So it would not be fair or prudent for me to voice a desire for him to be expelled right now.
But you all don't think that there is any legislative action after this that should be taken in terms of governing the conduct of members of the council?
I'm glad you're asking about this. I think the universe of people who have really thought deeply about this is small. No. We have a code of conduct. If the charges are accurate, Councilmember Trayon White has broken the code of conduct. We have laws that apply to everyone. If the charges are correct, then he has broken the law. So we don't need any new rules or new laws. We need people to follow the laws. But the other thing people have to remember, or I would urge people to remember, is if Councilmember Trayon White were expelled today, he's likely going to be reelected in 3 weeks, and he would be seated. If he is expelled after he gets reseated, if he has not been convicted, he could run in the special election for that seat. So, as Councilmember Christina Henderson said, this is a difficult issue. It's uncharted territory, but it's not one I believe requires new laws.
And then Councilmember Henderson, you said previously that this has happened, they immediately resign. And in this case, I didn't know that. I was just kind of curious about it. So you were just surprised that he didn't resign? Is that?
I'm not saying surprised. I'm just stating in the 3 times that I know prior that this has happened, each of those members resigned within 24 to 48 hours after they were charged.
Speaking of council conduct, there's been less than cordial, maybe sort of familial relations between DC Council and the executive office of the mayor. There was some disagreement recently, for instance, about DCHA housing vouchers and what happened with the budget. There's a conflict over crime bills and public safety legislation. This seems to be a little bit of a doorstop in terms of moving the city forward. What can we do over the next few years to increase cooperation or ensure we're all pushing towards the same goals? Is that a possibility for us? Who wants to go first?
This is an unfair question. Because we are only
Then I'm glad I asked
No,
it.
I think this is an unfair question because we are one half of the relationship. And in every instance, like some of you guys don't know, like the mayor hosts office hours on Monday afternoons where she's available. I go to office hours, have conversations, we can work things out. There are conflicts that play out in the press and the media, but for the vast majority of the work that we do, we are able to work with agencies to move things forward. It is those amplified pieces that in some cases, it's just a lack of communication amongst the two. I pointed this out before, earlier this year, but I'll point it out again. Next week, we're supposed to have a mayor council breakfast. Mayor council breakfasts used to happen every month. We haven't had a mayor council breakfast since the budget? Okay. And so when we're setting goals and priorities about how we move the district forward, I don't know how we do that if we can't talk to one another and have honest conversations about the priorities. And I think it's going to be super important because, and I'm running out of time here, but I'll just say really quickly, I hate the way that we do the budget process in the district because nobody comes together to talk about what are the priorities of the city until after the committees have already done all of their work. And then we're fighting, as opposed to at the beginning saying, there might be some difficult conversations we need to have. These are the 5 to 10 things that we absolutely want to fund and have those conversations, and I think that would work better for us. But I'm always open for a conversation.
This council has taken on very difficult issues, and we've worked it out. Look at the public safety bill. Look at emergency rental assistance reform. The council also consistently works with the Attorney General, but for some reason the council and the AG have difficulty working with the mayor. And so I would say the mayor's the outlier. I need the mayor to be able to work with the legislative branch. If the mayor sets the agenda for the city, the clear priorities, and says, I want to work with the council in figuring out the path to those priorities. If the mayor works with the council to establish the budget and says to the council members, I know you have priorities like I have priorities, So rather than fighting out publicly at the end, let's work together on shared priorities and me understanding what's important to you at the beginning. I think we have processes that work. The mayor and I have very different leadership philosophies. I don't believe hers are serving the city particularly well right now, but like other residents, I hold out hope that it's going to be more cooperative.
The issue of violence interrupters was also part of the Trayon White story, and I'm just interested in your views on violence interrupters in the city. So far, in your view, is the program working? Is it worth it?
So look, if I show up in a community tonight that has a high level of crime and I start saying, hey, what's going on? What's about to happen? I'm not going to get a lot of answers. If our police working hard, doing very dangerous work, show up and try to do the same thing, they're not going to get a lot of answers. But people in those communities with credibility can get answers, can find out what's about to happen before it happens, can find out what happened and who the police need to talk to and work with the police in partnership. That is how that program is supposed to work, and that is how it can work. The problem is we don't have a way right now to say whether or not it works. So some residents will say, well, we have violence interrupters, but crime goes up. And I will say, well, how do you feel about police? And they'll say, well, we love the police. I'm saying, but you have police and crime is going up. And so it's not exactly logical, but we do have to have data points. And so I keep insisting on this. I have legislation I'm going to reintroduce if it doesn't get passed this year to require us to start to keep data on violence intervention programs so that we know what we're aiming for and we know whether or not it works. But yes, they are very important.
I would agree with Councilmember Robert White on that. I feel like there's definitely a role for violence interrupters in our public safety landscape. Do I feel like we set up the program and the Office for Success? Probably not. They've had, I think, 4 directors in the 4 years that I have been a council member. At the same time, saw almost double or triple the budget because we had all of this additional money for COVID. So do I feel like we should throw the baby out with the bathwater because of this, conflict? No. But I do feel like we need to effectively decide whether or not we are, 1, investing in great leadership, 2, training the violence interrupters in a way that they can be successful, 3, paying them in a way such that they don't have to have 3 and 4 jobs, but this can be their job with benefits, which is not what's happening now. And so I think that there are improvements that can be made to the program to shore it up, but I don't feel like we need to get rid of it altogether.
One thing you said, Councilmember White, is that they would work with the police. And my experience of talking to these violence interrupter groups, they don't work with the police. Apparently that is why they're trusted. But that seems to be a problem. They don't want to be perceived as working with the police because they're trying to talk to people that may or may not be afraid of the police. Is that a consideration there?
It is a consideration. If you talk to the police, they will tell you we work with the violence interrupters. I talk to police. If you talk to the violence interrupters, but if there's a perception that they are an extension of the police, then they lose their credibility. That is a difficult tightrope to walk, but that is the one that they walk every day. But it also creates a difficulty in their work because not everyone in the community trusts them. And when people gain trust but can't stay in that job because it doesn't pay enough or because it doesn't have the mental health benefits that frankly are necessary for a job like that, it makes it more difficult. But they do work with the police and are part of the public safety ecosystem.
And then finally for me on this issue, apparently there are 2 sets of violence interrupters. There's the Attorney General's violence interrupters and there's the Mayor's violence interrupters. Have you seen any difference in, let's say, success between the 2 groups?
Well, you're hitting Sam. You're hitting on something that I love. We have to always be getting better, and so under the Attorney General and under the Mayor, there are several subcontractors. Inevitably, some are doing some of their duties better than others. They have to learn from each other. That does not exist right now, and that would be a vast improvement for the violence intervention program.
Let's stick with public safety for now, if I may. It's very difficult to understand what's happening in the system when youth interact with justice. Youth, yeah. What? Yeah, I did say youth. That must be my Canadian accent, you guys. What, if anything, should the district do to provide more transparency and accountability in the way it handles young offenders?
I think that's a difficult question because obviously there are laws in place to protect the identity of a minor, even when they might commit a heinous crime in that regard. There are some things that we are doing better. So from some of the emergency legislation that was passed, we're now getting more data. The question is, where is that data housed and how do people have access to it? You kind of have to dig, you have to find. I hate DC government's websites. All of these agencies know that I do. It is literally a black hole, and I feel like we should be able to do so much better. But that's something that I feel like we need to be able to continue to work on. There is information we can provide in the aggregate, and I think that we have to do, I think our agencies, U.S. Attorney's Office, the Attorney General's Office needs to do a better job, because in the vacuum of information, that is when you get disinformation. And in the vacuum of information, that is also when you get a heightened level of fear and perception around, well, every child in the district is justice involved, when frankly, that's just not the case. So we need to do better in terms of getting our data out.
Data are important with respect to juvenile crimes and everything else. Something that I'm always conscious of is when I was a kid, I did some dumb things, and some of those dumb things could have got me in a lot of trouble. And so when we talk about young people being involved in crimes, I want to make sure we don't sort of categorize everybody into the same group. Something that I think my colleague Charles Allen did really well when he chaired the Public Safety Committee was making sure that we had ramps for young people who did dumb things but could recover and would do worse if we locked them up. And held accountable young people who really engaged in violent crime and needed to have more of a sense of accountability. And so data tells part of the story, but frankly, it doesn't tell any of the story if you don't have accurate data. So we want to make sure that we are, creating the right avenues for young people, but we need to study the data to get better. Right now, the data is not great. I know I need to stop, but hopefully I'll have an opportunity to talk about the Youth Services Center at some point.
Oh, I do want to ask a follow-up though, sorry, Sam. Is the data there? Like, the question is, like, we should be providing data in aggregate so that people understand. I think part of the question that people often have is what happens to youth once they interact with the system? It's a big black hole, nobody knows, right? So if the data is there, what does the data tell you?
I will say this, the data exists in so much as you have a data analyst who can go pull it. Every time I ask questions of, say, the U.S. Attorney's Office or even the court system, sometimes they'll say, oh, we have to go case by case to get the answer on that particular question. Because in the past, that hadn't been a part of their work ethos, which is public reporting on the work that they are doing in the aggregate form. And so I think now they're getting better at it. I think both the U.S. Attorney and the Attorney General have now hired data analysts so that could be more integral part of the work that they are doing. It takes time, but I do feel like it does exist, but not necessarily in a way that is easily accessible at this particular game. We also have the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, which also has a great deal of data as well. I think the question and my frustration is that anytime I ask some of our government agencies for data, they'll tell me, oh gosh, it's going to take a 30-day turnaround at least because we got to clean it and do all of these different things and X, Y, or Z. When in fact, I don't see these same types of lags in other jurisdictions. So it makes me question, what are we doing so special here that it takes me 30 days to get something that in Maryland it would only take me maybe 3 days?
I think that the reason I'm having a little trouble with this question is the issue that I've had, particularly with juveniles, has not so much been around what the data is, but what that data is telling us. So we understand at the Youth Services Center, a lot of folks are not showing up for work. Okay, we know that, but why? And because answering why tells us how to change it. We know that a number of our young people coming out of the Youth Services Center reoffend. I more would like to know why. And frankly, I think the why is because we're not offering the right services and protection at the Youth Services Center. We have data on the number of assaults at the Youth Services Center. We don't have an understanding of why and what the agency is going to do to stop it. So for me, the issue has not so much been finding the data, but finding answers to what the underlying issues are and what the solution is to fix them.
We have a question from the audience. The council, despite issues with DDOT, confirmed DDOT Director Kirschbaum. The justification was that the council issues were the result of the mayor, not Kirschbaum. Do you think the council should use the confirmation process to exact accountability or policy commitments? If so, when? If not, why take that off the table?
Great question. Very much a Capitol Hill question. Kudos to you all. So when I worked on Capitol Hill, and I saw that process play out, and there are pros and cons. When we confirmed a new chancellor of schools, I said, look, I have some serious issues with how teachers are evaluated. I believe it's causing a lot of good teachers to leave the city. Before I vote yes in favor of your confirmation, I need your commitment that you're going to take a fresh look at the impact teacher evaluation system. And he said yes. They kind of looked at it, they kind of didn't. That's not something I want us to do too routinely. I voted against some of the mayor's nominees because I believe they were not qualified. But we hold nominees to a different standard on the local level than they do on the federal level, because a lot of that is about show, politics, and power. And at the local level, you have got to get things done. You can't just kick the can down the road. You can't print more money. You got to spend the money that you have, and you got to get the teachers paid and the roads paid. So no, we cannot do that a whole lot in a way that I think is productive.
I think it's really difficult to ask a nominee, are you going to do X, Y, or Z particular policy, because they could say yes, and then what happens when they don't do it because the mayor disagrees with that or it's not implemented on that front. I think there's this view that the council is summarily approving every single nominee, and that's simply not the case. There have been a couple of nominees in the last couple of years who we actually didn't even get a chance to vote on. They ended up withdrawing the nominee as opposed to the council voting a nominee down. That doesn't actually get reported on. Those have been specific conversations, whether it's either past performance disagreements, policy disagreements, or otherwise. But I think that, oftentimes the mayor talks on the national level as though the mayoralship in the District of Columbia is somehow weak. It is not. It is very strong, and in fact, some other mayors in other cities would like the powers and controls that she has. We have the power to appropriate and legislate, but we don't implement. That is in the role of the executive.
That's actually another audience question. What are your views on mayoral control? Originally, I thought this question was about the schools. This is a standard question, right? What's your view of mayoral control of the schools? But I think this might be a different question. Our mayor is very empowered. Do you feel like the legislative role of the mayor, that the administrative role of the mayor needs to be re-examined in light of some of these concerns?
I don't think it necessarily needs to be re-examined in whole, and I want to set there are particular issues apart from that. But I do feel like in the past and even now, I feel like the council has given the executive more power because we have failed to conduct effective oversight on some of the policies and issues. And when we don't act or speak on a particular issue, or when we're not persistent and consistent in asking questions and holding the executive accountable for delivering on projects for which you need to deliver on or that you've promised to deliver on, we give her power in the absence. You give her power in the vacuum of action on the council side. And so I do feel like we as a body need to get better about doing oversight in a consistent and persistent manner, and also being proactive as opposed to reactive. And that's something I've tried to do as chair of the Committee on Health, being very proactive in the conversations that we're having around whether it be opioids or psychiatric facilities. I have a hearing in December on the new hospital because, we didn't spend $400 million for that not to work. We need to talk about some of these things. And so I think we need to do more to exert power and control on our side. In
a perfect world, D.C. would be a state already. We are not yet. And so our mayor is the chief executive, is essentially our governor. And I want our governor, even when I disagree with him, to have the control that a governor should have. Where I think we fall short is, again, with my vision, Vermont and Wyoming have fewer people, residents, than D.C. Both of them have very large state legislatures. They have city councils and they have county councils. They have hundreds of people doing the jobs that 13 of us do. There are only so many hours in a day. I would like us to have a larger council. That is necessary for better oversight, because if we put our eyes on one thing, we have taken our eye off of another thing. And so this is really important. In the time that I've been on the council, 8 years, D.C. government, well, no, 10 years since this mayor has been in charge, D.C. government has grown by about 10,000 employees. The council hasn't really grown. And so the executive continues to grow over the span of home rule. The council stays the same, and we are struggling to keep up. So I'd like to see more authority, more firepower in the council.
The initiatives have these numbers and you get them confused. So we got 80, 82, 83. I want to ask about 82. That's the one on tipped workers. And the Post did a big piece on that today. It was kind of interesting. And as I read it, the gist of it is that that D.C. may be losing business to the surrounding areas because of the tip worker program. And I'm just curious, as you know, I don't know if you all were initially supporters of it or not, but what are your thoughts? I mean, is this a program that seems to be working? Is this something that needs to be looked at again? What are your thoughts about this? Start with you, Mr. White.
I don't think we can ever take anything off the table. Here's what I think. I think people that work should be able to earn a living wage and be able to afford to live in this city. I come from a family where my grandfather delivered groceries during the day in a truck, or beer during the day in a truck, and groceries in the evening by bicycle. But you can't make a living in a lot of places. But tip workers were telling me something different when this issue was moving through. They were saying a lot of them are making good money, and they said don't mess with our money. But we passed Initiative 82, and what we're starting to hear from restaurants is that they're having trouble keeping the doors open. Well, if they can't keep the doors open, then that means folks are losing their jobs. So we've got to be willing to look at the data, have the difficult conversations, and I'm willing to do that. So I wasn't initially a supporter of Initiative 82. I had some concerns about the impact it would have on jobs. Restaurants are saying that's bearing out, but I want to look at the data and do what is required here.
I think this needs more examination, because there have been other places that have gotten rid of the tip minimum wage. I think the difference between, say, us and California is that we have this whole new gratuity fee situation. I went to a restaurant recently, and they have to tell you the note about where this 20% fee is going. And they said, well, it's 20% fee is going to the restaurant, not to the employee, and therefore you are encouraged to tip 20% on top of that. We had this debate at the council earlier this year around how the fee structure is actually discouraging people from going to restaurants, because who wants to pay an additional 40% on their meal on top of what you already paid? And so I feel like, unfortunately, the rollout of Initiative 82 has doomed its success, because we haven't dealt with these additional pieces, which I felt in some cases, when I see restaurants who are calling it the I-82 fee, you're making it punitive. So, and before we capped it at the council of 20%, there were some restaurants who were even higher. And I think we have to ask that question. Who is tipping 20 on top of the 20, on top of the tax?
Sam,
I went over.
Let's spin out then too, since we're talking a little bit about the economy. I don't know if you walked around Capitol Hill lately. Some businesses are thriving, many businesses are thriving, but there are still some holes, like missing teeth, in some of our literal bids in main streets. What can we do as DC Council now, as we're still in COVID recovery, to promote and support these local businesses?
I would like to see us explore programs around helping either a business buy their building or buy their space, or help to subsidize the rent, because I think that is actually some of the cause of some of the issues. There are businesses across the city where I say, why can't this restaurant, which is, Washingtonian ranked them best new restaurant, they're getting, honorable mention on Michelin, and yet they're closing 3 weeks later. And then you ask how much their rent is. It is nearly impossible for them to clear a $25,000 a month rent and also keep their business open. And so when we think about some of these things, we have to look at what are the expensive pieces of your business and where can we help support folks, especially when we have so many vacancies. And I feel like if we're going to be subsidizing vacant spaces in the downtown region, we should look at other commercial corridors who could also use small business or pop-ups to be able to fill some of those gaps.
I got an earful in Capitol Hill not long ago about 7-Eleven closing.
3 of them.
Yes. Look, we have to prop up neighborhoods during difficult times, and neighborhoods include our small businesses. So that's something that we have to take seriously. And some of that propping up is going to be financial. Some of it is flexibility to allow pop-ups and other uses so that there is some life even when there's not a permanent business there. But to solve the permanent problem, you have to understand what the root causes are of the permanent problems. We have permitting problems in our city. You got to pay extra money for an expediter. Is that the reason? We are still struggling with public safety in our city. Is that the reason? Rent costs a lot, as I've said several times here, but it's for commercial spaces too. Is that the reason? So let's talk to our small businesses and the communities, understand what the key issues are, and solve for those problems.
I was at the neighborhood Safeway down the street, and I walked in, and they had an entire aisle of stuff that was locked up in the drug section of the store, and I was like, a whole aisle? Because in some places I think Safeway would keep the Tide up front or whatever, but here they had the Tide. They had a number of the drug items that were were relatively more expensive. And of course, there's a lot more, it seemed to be a lot more security. You got to scan something before you can get out of the store. But what about this situation? I mean, this is not just D.C., but we've seen it nationwide. But what should the city be doing to sort of help these businesses that seem to be getting ripped off like this? And of course, you mentioned 7-Eleven, but I think CVS has been the same thing in the northern part of the city. I think that the store closed because of that. What are your thoughts on that?
As I said before, I'm a resident here. I live here. When I see CVS closing, when I see everyday products locked up, it makes me sad. Something happened in COVID that we need to address and recover from. As we do, the city is going to have to help, but small businesses are having to pay for security, many of them out of pocket. That's a business expense that many didn't anticipate. If that leads to a business closing, again, we have lost jobs, and our residents need jobs, so we got to take those security costs seriously. We also have to make sure that enforcement is consistent. None of us want to see anybody locked up or prosecuted, but if there is a notion or a practice that there's not accountability for crime, crime doesn't go down, it expands, and you end up with more people locked up. So I want to see more accountability. That means that when I call 911, I need to get an answer. That means when the police show up, we need enough people collecting evidence and good leadership in our crime lab. And that means we need our prosecutors, unfortunately, our federal, to prosecute even the cases that are not sexy. And some of that isn't happening right now.
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Robert White. I feel like D.C. sort of lost its way a little bit when it came to accountability. I asked the U.S. Attorney this, I think it was last year when the mayor held a crime summit. It was like, why aren't you prosecuting misdemeanors? He had a variety of reasons as to why. Oh, the shop owner didn't show up, or this, that, and the third, in terms of them not moving forward on a particular claim. But my question around that was around when misdemeanors go unchecked, they turn into felonies. People get bolder in terms of what they think they can get away with because they haven't been caught, and we sort of see that or saw that happen, right? You would see a press release around someone who has been arrested for a carjacking, and it wasn't just one, but it was 6. that tells me that they got bold over time because there was nothing that happened in that regard. And we are seeing more chargings that are happening. We also need to address our judicial vacancy issue because I feel like when you don't have swift justice, that also impacts our accountability. But when I have 8 Superior Court justices that are vacant right now, the calendar is full. And so, the entire ecosystem, I hate that it's so disjointed, but we also need Congress to do their role.
Let's turn to health. You and I have talked about this before, Councilmember Henderson, but I appreciate your view, Councilmember White. There's a group of parents in the community that are tracking school nurses since Council adopted the school cluster model. For those of you who don't know, that means that there's a school nurse and some techs that rotate between schools, paying the most attention to the schools with the highest health needs. Many parents say that just means the office, the health office, the school nurse is just not there. There's no one there a lot of the time. So, what is your view now on the success of the cluster model, and would you support legislation that some of these parents are talking about returning to a full-time nurse in every school?
Well, we just had a hearing on this. And so I'll tell you what I continue to tell those parents. In an ideal world, yes, we would have a registered nurse in every school. Do I feel like every school needs a registered nurse? Can they deal with an LPN? Can they use someone who is trained as an EMT? Absolutely. But in our city, we have, not just our city, in the nationwide, we have a nursing shortage. And so we could do what we did, or what I see in our school-based behavioral health program, where I have provided funding for every single school to be able to have a school-based mental health provider, and yet we're still at about 60% of our schools who have someone because we haven't been able to staff it. And so I think we have to think of what is our best and effective use based on the workforce that we have, and there are definitely some things that DC Health needs to do better that I'm encouraging them to do so. For instance, they are going to be rebidding the contract for school nurses, and I feel like we need to think about the ways in which we do better. But I also don't want to demean what an LPN provides, nor do I want to demean the individuals who are health techs, because on a training level, our health techs are also at the same level as someone who's an EMT. And that's what you get when you call 911. You're getting EMTs. And so I think there's definitely more work that needs to be done there, but the oversight will continue. And truly, this is a budget issue.
Look, I got 2 little girls in my neighborhood school, and if they sustain a serious injury, I want a health professional at the school. In fact, at our school, unfortunately, we had a child who had an allergy issue, and it was not responded to in the way that it should have been, and not to the benefit of that child. The child is okay now. We can have some flexibility. Like, I understand as a parent, if there's a nursing shortage, if we have a health professional. But I do think it is important for peace of mind and for the safety of our students to have a health professional in every school. I do not, though, think this is something we should mandate by law by itself, and here's why. Because I also believe we need a librarian. I also believe we need college counselors. I also believe we need literature teachers. And so if we don't have a comprehensive list, then I worry about legislating one position but not the next one.
A couple of weeks ago, I was down the street here, 12th and Pennsylvania, on my bicycle, and hit one of those things they'd put on 12th Street. Like when you park a car, you kind of get up these concrete barriers. Well, there's one on 12th Street, and I hit it and almost crashed. And I went home and I wrote a thing on Facebook of how the Department of Transportation was my least favorite agency in the D.C. government. And amazingly, the next day they were gone. Now, these things
The Department of Transportation?
That would explain some
Yeah,
things right
right.
there.
But the point was, there was nothing leading up to them, right? Like if they were like a bike lane or something, they were just there. And so at this point, you're like, what is this? And then somebody wrote, it's a bike lane. I was like, oh, but there was nothing anyway. It was gone. The question is, some people really don't like these bike lanes. I have a bike, and it's kind of nice to have them there sometimes. But what about community input in terms of these things? Should there be more community input, and should there be some kind of logic that you build the bike lane, you put the markings down and stuff before you put these barriers in so that people understand what's going on? What are your thoughts?
I'm a biker. My husband is a biker. My kids bike. I actually just got a new bike. Nonetheless, that's not part of what you're saying. Here,
I'm a biker too.
here's what I will say. I do not actually believe that every street can be everything for everyone. Take H Street. You got the streetcar, you got regular traffic, you got
somebody got killed
bikes,
on
you
a
got
bicycle.
pedestrians, you got all of these various things that take place. And I feel like if we had made a better decision there for businesses, for safety, for otherwise, as opposed to trying to be everything for everyone, that we would get there. I do feel like DDOT for a long time had this like, oh, I need to deliver 30 miles of bike trails in this fiscal year, regardless of where it is. So I'm attack it where I can. Because sometimes it doesn't make sense. It's disconnected, it's disjointed, and all of those different pieces. I think there is a bike lane that they just put in at 11th and R, and I actually think it's a dangerous bike lane, how they did it, because if a car is turning right, you can't see the person who is coming, because they did not put, what do you call that, the traffic light? That, the traffic signal that they have on some other places that says, this is the bike lane light versus everyone else. Anyway, I know he's pointing to say we have to stop here, but I do believe that we're getting some logic back into the bike lane policy, and we just need to work more on that to make sense.
I have questions about how you crashed your bike into a bike lane. I went on maybe about a year and a half ago now, I did a tour in Ivy City with the ANC commissioner. And he took me around to a small garden apartment, and they had just built a bike lane in front of this street, and he said that there's an older woman with mobility issues who lived there, and that Metro Access picked her up in front of the building, and they built a protected bike lane in front of this building. And when the commissioner asked, well, how is she supposed to get to her Metro Access or vehicle transportation, the DDOT employee said she should walk to the corner. That is the type of thing that makes people hate bike lanes. That is also a fixable issue. So communities can understand that they can have input without having veto problem. And people who are all the way in for bike lanes can understand that a bike lane doesn't belong on every single street. And unfortunately, there are some people who are on extremes of this and think that, there's no hope for the other side. I'm not one of those people. I believe that there's a logical way to have a network protected around the city for people who bike and want to do it safely.
You guys get so excited about bike lanes. But let's talk more about public engagement. And this is a question from the audience, and it's a nice one. We are always talking about young people. What are young people up to? How can we give them more job opportunities? How can we engage them? How can we engage them with our city? How can DC Council engage more young people in policy-making processes, especially given that so many council activities are scheduled during the day when these young people are supposed to be in school, and they can't testify to the impact of some of the bills that come before council during hearings?
At the beginning of this year, there was a lot of uproar over juvenile crime. And a lot of people saying, you got to lock these kids up, you got to lock their parents up. And I said, okay, we need to solve a problem here. So what I spent about 4 months doing was talking to young people around the city. I held forums, often partnered with youth organizations, met with them. We did Instagram live chats. But instead of talking about young people, I spoke to them. I developed a youth-focused public safety bill using their ideas, invited them to the press conference, made sure they testify at the hearing. So all that to say is you got to be deliberate. We also have some amazing local organizations like Black Swan Academy that put youth voices front and center. And so the opportunities are there, and we have to use them. Sometimes that means you got to have some evening and weekend meetings, but it is something that some of us do.
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember White around the need to be intentional in terms of how we schedule things. I've had youth come to testify at my hearings. There are a couple of bills that I've passed that have actually come from young people. One about access to medical records, and the other, there were a couple of bills that we did, but it was the young people who told us, hey, we need to bring back the peer sexual health program that we used to have pre-COVID, because we're talking to some of our colleagues and they're getting their information from TikTok, and that's not okay with us. They were also the ones who, and we funded that, and that program has restarted this school year. They also told us too, around school-based behavioral health, that they feel like they needed a peer program where, as a young person, if you have a peer who comes up to you and says that they need help, they didn't feel like they had the tools, and we provided funding 2 years in a row for that program to launch as well. That came specifically from young people who often come to testify, or if they don't testify, we do have meetings offline with those young people for them to express their views. But I'm proud to have worked on legislation that came directly from the young people.
Both of you are probably going to be reelected. I would bet money on it. And so the question I have is, one or two things. What are your top priorities as you approach this new term?
That's a great question. We don't have enough time, so I'm going to give you like the top two. So I focus a lot on this year around our direct care economy. So pay equity fund for early childhood educators, but we also did legislation on direct care workers that focuses on our seniors. So those who might want to age in place but might need assistance to do it, home health aides, certified nursing assistants, and trying to ensure that that workforce is also earning a dignified wage, and we're recruiting people to be able to provide those jobs here. We need to fund that legislation, and I think that we're not done yet on that conversation around the direct care economy here in the district, and why it's so expensive. So that's something I'm going to be focusing on. We're also going to be doing a really big push around looking at inpatient psychiatric facilities to truly help people who need help in a more aggressive space as opposed to just outpatient, particularly for young people. Right now, if you have a young person in crisis, there are only 7 beds in the District of Columbia for a young person in crisis, which I think is embarrassing for the nation's capital, and we need to do more on those. So those are two big issues that I'll be focusing on if elected for a second term.
I do hope I'm reelected, and I'm going to play to the whistle. I'm not going to take my eye off of public safety, and even though it's not one of the two things I'm going to discuss here, I want people to know I'm going to stay focused on that. But two things I'm going to focus on in the next term. One is housing. We've been in a housing crisis for a while. We are in a severe housing crisis. And so I'm going to bring forward comprehensive legislation to make sure that we are building and preserving housing for everyday people in this city. The second thing that I'm prioritizing is the future of downtown, because that is the engine of our economy. And so while downtown, there might not be anybody else's priority in this room, if your priority is schools, if it's public safety, if it's roads, we have to fund it somehow. And the future of downtown is incredible. If we turn it into a network of neighborhoods that attracts people from the region to a renewed nightlife scene and art scene downtown, if we don't focus on that in a real way and do it right, our economy is going to struggle for decades.
All right, this is my second unfair question, probably, Commissioner Councilmember Henderson, but it's for Councilmember Robert White. The DC Council election system, the off-on system, where some ward members are elected in one round and some ward members are elected in two years later, means that the mayor is elected with a slate and the mayoral race is in a different slate, right? You know what I mean. Tom Sherwood has been on CityCast, and he says, Robert White Sr., he's going to run for mayor in 2 years. If that's true, and you tell me if it is, why would we vote you in right now for what could be half your term?
Well, I'm running for DC Council right now. It's the only thing I'm running for, and I want to be very clear about that. And I'm running with a vision for things to do on the council. I'm not running for a vision for mayor. I have a broader vision for what I think we can do as a city, but that is not what I'm running for right now. So I'm asking for your vote because I've been an effective council member. I'm asking for your vote because I'm talking about the things that I'm going to be, that I'm going to do in my next term. And that's that.
And is the run afoot? Do you think you could run for mayor in 2 years?
So here's the problem, right? When you act cagey, people like politicians are always cagey. But when you answer openly on CityCast, he's like, well, I'm not running for mayor right now, but let me talk about it. Then Tom Sherwood is tweeting that you're running for mayor. I'm not going to fall into this trap again. This is the only seat I'm running for. And I want to be very clear about that. And I take the job seriously, you know. I hope that shows in the work that I do every single day. And if I'm reelected on November 5th or November 6th, you are not going to see a difference in my pace, in my work on the council.
Now I'm going to direct a question to you, Councilmember Henderson. Just to be fair, although my question will probably be less unfair. We got a big hospital coming to Ward 8. We have had labor disputes within our hospitals before, but you've already spoken of the challenges of a Ward 8 hospital. Ward 8 hospital that's supposed to be at the center of a health network, provide primary care, optional care. But when I speak to people in Ward 8, they don't have a great deal of hope that that hospital is going to be the center of a healthcare network that's going to serve them. They see themselves going to an ER again. What can we do to avoid the problems that have befuddled some of our previous hospitals or are now closing hospitals?
Well, I think that's a great question. And so this is something I was talking about in terms of persistency and being proactive in terms of oversight. I was having conversations with community providers in Ward 8, and I was talking about, okay, the hospital's going to open in March. What are the conversations? And they were like, wait, in March? And I was like, yeah, that's the timeline I have. What have the timeline? And they basically said we haven't heard from the hospital in quite some time. And so that sent off alarm bells for me because, again, I'm not paying $400 million for a hospital for it to be empty or for people to view that they still have to go west to get good care. And so I sent a letter to the CEO of the hospital, the head of UHS, the head of GW Medical Faculty Associates, and it basically said we're 6 months out. And we're not seeing, one, the level of community engagement that was promised prior to me becoming a council member, but nonetheless, it was an agreement that I'm going to hold to. And two, the policies and procedures that I feel like should be in place by this point. The CEO can't be the one who's hiring everybody at the hospital, and yet he seems to be the only person at the table. And so we have seen some progress thus far. Like I said, I told them we will hold a hearing in December, and so y'all have 2 months to get it together because this hospital cannot fail. And so we're going to be holding them accountable and holding their feet to the fire and ensuring that they're providing the quality care that they're providing at every other hospital across the city. Mm-hmm.
So 2 stay tuned there. Your turn, Sam.
How long are we going?
It's 8:24. I think let's each ask one more question. Let's let him wrap up.
I think y'all are wondering that same thing.
There's only 2 of us.
Well, one thing that I'm just curious about is your relationship with the mayor. I know certainly in this term that you all are in, it was certainly a big brouhaha with the Republican members of Congress, and you are on one side, the mayor, and they were on the other side in this issue of, you all were kind of the out group there. And in fact, President Biden even said he was going to support this police bill and ultimately did not. What are your thoughts about this next term and same mayor, basically same council? Are you all, let's say, going to do anything differently because of the past?
Depending on what happens in November, and even then, right, if we say that we want DC statehood, then we need to be one band, one sound. If you've lost a vote, you don't need to go to Congress to ask them to overturn it. To me, that then is hypocritical to saying you want DC statehood. I've lost votes, he's lost. There are things for which we don't always get what we want, but at the end of the day, we need to move forward for the better good of the District of Columbia. And so I would say we've had disagreements. If you recall earlier this year, we threatened to take the mayor to court over a particular issue that I was spearheading around giving SNAP a raise, to which she didn't want to do. I think for me, and I've always tried to underscore this, is that oversight doesn't need to be adversarial. You have a job, I have a job, and I want to believe that we both have the best interests of the district residents at heart here, but I don't work for you, right? We are both leaders in this city. We are co-equal branches of government, and I do feel like, again, we got to do a better job in terms of communication, but what are we communicating outwardly to these Republicans who are always looking for an opportunity to needle and meddle? We cannot invite it ourselves.
I think that is right. We have to have our disagreements internally. DC is too vulnerable to federal intervention. I think when the mayor broke ranks on home rule and supported Congress overturning a DC bill, That was bad for the city, and it was bad for home rule. I don't think she would do that again. I hope she would not do that again. In a new term, look, I'm going to keep trying to work better with the mayor. I hope the mayor will continue to try to work better with me. We do have different leadership philosophies, and one of the things I struggle with, and Councilmember Henderson hit on this, criticism is a necessary ingredient of progress. Not only should you not like push it away, you should invite it. Because you only get better if you keep people around you who critique your work. And frankly, you should want to do that. I have trouble with our agencies because they view criticism as hostility. I do not. I view it as a part of a partnership in the progress of the city. So I'm going to keep doing my work like that. I'm going to keep trying to build and develop a relationship with the mayor. And I'm going to do my job to hold her accountable as well.
My last question will be the wrap-up question, actually, and I think you all each have 2 minutes for this one. A good reporter, your last question is, what's the thing we didn't ask you to say that you think you would like to tell all these people? This is your wrap-up statement. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you again for the invitation to join you all. I would say in the wrap-up statement, I want to remind everyone that you have 2 votes for at-large council. As my colleague mentioned, a lot of people don't choose to use that. But I hope that folks look at the totality of my record. I'm often called the policy wonk, and I lean into that. I read, I ask questions, I show up, because I think it is a part of my responsibility and my job. As Councilmember White said, to me, oversight is the ability to protect programs that you like. It's the ability to sharpen on other things. And I still feel like I have really good policy ideas to put forward to move things forward here in the District of Columbia. And so if you visit ChristinaHenderson.org, we might not have had a question asked on something that was burning for you, but I have an issue area page there that talks specifically on my record. What have I done? What have I accomplished? What bills have passed? Whether it be getting the first dog park open east of the river, that's something small, but it was very big for that community. It took 4 years in order to do that. Or something big, which is changing our insurance laws to now enable individuals to be able to expand their families without breaking the bank, and everything in between. I've tried to be a very active participant on the council, maybe to the chagrin of some of my colleagues when I show up to hearings, and I'm not a member of their committee. But I feel like it's important and it's part of my job. This has been one of the most fun jobs that I have had because I am a problem solver. And I often say politicians talk about problems, but leaders are the ones who fix it. And if you send me back to the council, I'll keep doing that each and every day.
First, I want to thank the hosts, Capital Community News, Ward 6 Dems, Ward 3 Dems, the Young Dems, and want to thank the moderators and my fellow candidate. It's a lot of work to put yourself out. We both are parents of young children and do this in service to the city. I like my colleague, I love this job, but I view my role as one where you have got to solve problems. When I saw an issue with people living on the streets with vouchers and got to the root of the issue, I realized we needed more social workers. So I worked with the University of the District of Columbia to create a free master's in social work program for our residents. When I looked at a broken public housing agency, I first worked with the mayor to reform the board. Then I worked with that board to get new leadership, and now I work with that leadership on oversight and accountability. From the big things to the small things like helping neighborhoods get stop signs to keep their kids safe. That is what I have done in this seat. That is the work that I want to continue to do, and that is why I'm asking for your vote. This election is important. We have some difficult issues in front of us. Public safety is still front and center for most of us. Our economy is not as stable as it has been for the past 2.5 decades. These are issues that require problem solvers at the table. That is what I want to be for you. So I'm asking for your vote. I'm also asking you to get involved in the national level because it matters to us locally. So even if you can't spend a day in Pennsylvania, make some phone calls. And if you are so inclined to get involved in the local campaign, sign up with us. On election night, I hope you will join us in Ward 5 at Busboys and Poets. It'll be me, my family, a number of people from the community. I always remember where I was in 2008 when Barack Obama won the primary, and I want to be with y'all when we see the first black woman elected as president. And I hope to have a vote along with Kamala Harris. Thank you.
Well, I guess that would wrap us up. Let's have a wave from our own Ward 6 council member, Charles Allen, who snuck in the back. Elizabeth, any comment?
I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us this evening on a Wednesday night when there's lots of other things that you could have been doing. So thank you to all of you for coming out to educate yourself about the candidates that are running for election this fall here in D.C. and about where they stand on the issues that are most important to you. I wanted to thank the Hill Center for hosting us and also to Capital Community News. I wanted to thank, obviously, our candidates for joining us this evening, Councilmember Christina Henderson and Councilmember Robert White. I wanted to thank our moderators, Sam Ford and Elizabeth Ogorek. And our fellow sponsors, Ward 3 Dems, DC Young Dems. One more thing, we have Harris Walls signs outside. Please feel free to take one with you as you go or more to put in your yard, in your balcony, in your window. But let's blanket the town with some Harris Walls signs. So thank you all and have a great evening. Thank you to our timekeeper, my spouse, Jim.